If you've just taken your first IB teaching position, I'm willing to bet that you've already told yourself that you're going to work harder than ever, read every resource, and get ahead of content. I did exactly the same. And I'm going to show you why that instinct, while understandable, is the thing most likely to make your first year harder than it needs to be. Because there is a specific thing that the IB rewards, and it is not what you think. Stick with me and I'll show you exactly what it is before this video ends. I've been working with new IB teachers for a while now, and there are 4 areas that come up again and again. 4 places where the IB catches people completely off guard because no one tells you in advance. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly where those gaps are, what to do about them, and honestly, what to stop worrying about. Let's get into it. The first thing that gets almost every new IB teacher is the obsession with the textbook. You arrive, you are handed a textbook, and it feels like the answer to everything. It is organized, it's detailed, it covers the topics, so you plan your year around it. And this is where it gets interesting, because the textbook is not the course. The subject guide provided by the IB is the course. The textbook is just someone else's interpretation of the guide, and those two things are not always the same. When you build your teaching around the textbook instead of the guide itself, you are handing someone else control over your curriculum decisions, over your perspectives, and sooner or later that creates gaps between what you've taught and what the IB actually assesses. The fix is straightforward, but it requires a change. Open the subject guide first. Every time, let the textbook be a resource that you pull from, not a map that you follow. And this connects directly to something a lot of teachers don't work out until it's too late, which I'll get to in a moment. This is about building your knowledge and understanding of assessment and expectations before you plan a single lesson. Getting good results does not rely just on good teaching. It depends on how well your teaching aligns with assessment expectations. That means understanding assessment criteria really well. It means knowing what examiners are looking for and building explicit skills in your students. It also means understanding how moderation works. I would urge you to switch from just focusing on syllabus and on content to paying attention to assessment. This means using examiner reports regularly, knowing the mark scheme as well as the syllabus. It also means checking past student samples to get an idea of quality, and also sharing this knowledge with your students so that they understand not only the content but also how they are going to be judged for it. And there's one area of assessment literacy that people continuously put off, and I want to address that next because it causes more first-year stress than almost anything else. Internal assessments. You are probably thinking, oh, I'll deal with the internal assessments later. I've got plenty of time and I need to get the teaching sorted first. And I understand the instinct. Internal assessments feel distant at the start of your first year of the diploma. They're complicated and there are 100 other things demanding your attention. But here's what actually happens if you leave them too late. You stop managing a process and you start managing panic because students haven't developed the skills they need. You haven't had time to give proper feedback. The deadline arrives and it's all a rush. So in order to stop this panic from happening, what you need is to start planning internal assessment right from day one. So that is part of your teaching, and so that your students start thinking about internal assessments. They understand the expectations. They have plenty of time to really mature their ideas and develop their skills. That can only happen if internal assessment thinking is really built into your teaching right from the beginning. My advice, map out your internal assessment timeline before the year starts. Build it into your scheme of work and make sure your students know what an internal assessment looks like in week 2, not in week 30. Now, there's one more area where first-year IB teachers usually misread what's being asked of their students, and this is specific to higher level courses. If you're teaching higher level classes, a common misconception is to think of higher level as standard level plus extra content. More content, more topics, more detail, a bigger pile of things to cover. The problem is that's not what higher level is. The difference between standard level and higher level courses is not necessarily quantity, it's about quality, about sophistication. Higher level students need to analyze more precisely, evaluate more critically, and engage with ideas at a higher level of abstraction. More content without more depth just overloads them without actually preparing them for what the assessment requires. Which means the question to ask when you are planning higher level isn't what else do I need to add, it's how much deeper does this thinking need to go. That's a fundamentally different planning question, and it changes how you structure almost everything. What does this actually look like in practice? None of this requires extra work. It requires a different type of work. Here's what you should do in your first week. Open the subject guide before you open the textbook. Download 3 or 4 recent examiner reports for your subject. Sketch out where your IAs land in the year and work backwards from the deadlines. And if you are teaching higher level, read the mark scheme for a high band response and ask yourself, are my lessons actually building towards that? And that's it. 4 things. None of them require more hours, they just require a different starting point. And here's the trap I would really urge you to avoid: working harder to compensate for unclear systems. More planning, more reading, more late nights, but none of that addressing the actual problem. As I mentioned earlier, the IB doesn't reward exhaustion, it rewards alignment. Sustaining effort without alignment just means sustaining inefficiency with more energy. Just fix the system. The effort sorts itself out. The thing that connects all of this, the guide, the assessment, the IAs, the higher level thinking, is one underlying question. What does the IB actually reward? And how do I build my teaching around that? The question works regardless of your subject, your program, or whether you've been teaching for 20 years or 20 weeks. It's the question that turns reactive teaching into strategic teaching. The subject guide, not the textbook, that's your curriculum foundation. Assessment literacy, not just good teaching, that's what actually moves results. IA is built in from the start, not bolted at the end, and higher level as depth of thought, not volume of content. Your job isn't to know everything immediately. Your job is to understand the IB system well enough to focus on what actually matters. Once you have that clarity, the work becomes manageable and honestly a lot more satisfying. If you want to go deeper, watch the next video.